Welcome back to Block TV. It's time now for stress test, and what a week it's been, because in the crypto sphere we know the two biggest drivers still seem to be fear and greed, and I can tell you they are running me ragged. These emotions running the show. There's a serious need for the industry to develop more accurate metrics, but fortunately we have with us a man who can help calm and cool heads prevail. Of course, I'm talking about the TIE co-founder Joshua Frank, who can give us a little bit of perspective. Josh, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy Halloween. Thanks for having me. It looks like you had a little bit of a rough morning there.
I think we all have had a rough week, Josh, and I want you to help break it down for us. We had the spike of the century. What we were talking about last week, you and I were discussing the fact that sentiment was heading down to those 2017 lows. We were really hitting those rock bottom periods, to early 2018 rock bottom periods, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, a spike to change everything. What can you tell us? What is the sentiment data showing us?
Yeah, so really this spike doesn't seem to be driven by sentiment, and kind of what we're hearing basically from a lot of the largest funds and players in the space is nobody really knows what drove the spike. So there have been a lot of conversations on Twitter, and we've seen this happen after the spike, where people are kind of correlating this with President Xi's remarks about China moving into blockchain, but we don't really see that reflected in the data. So this red line, this red arrow here is when sentiment went positive, and it actually happened at 8:10 a.m. Eastern time, which was about 2 hours after the announcement. But the conversation around that positivity didn't have to do too much with the announcement. And what we really see here is that price moved significantly before sentiment did. So sentiment was slightly positive, but price really was the leading indicator here, or kind of led sentiment. So this really wasn't a sentiment-driven move. And we did see afterwards a massive spike in tweet volume. This is looking within October. The line here is tweet volume, and the area is price. But what we saw was that tweet volume basically retreated to where it was before. So even though price had a massive run up, it didn't really seem to bring in a ton more conversations. I mean, it did temporarily, but not significant. If we zoom out here, we can see really that volatility in tweet volume in that line. But we can also see that tweet volume is basically completely retreated to where it was prior to the spike on October 25th. But one thing that was interesting that we noticed was that while tweet volumes didn't go up that much, the number of Twitter users discussing Bitcoin temporarily did on the 25th. So as of 8 p.m. on that day, we'd actually seen the fourth highest day since February 2018 in terms of the number of Twitter users discussing Bitcoin. And the reason that tweet volume isn't reflective in that is because a metric called dispersion, or the percentage of tweets coming from unique Twitter accounts, reached its second highest level we had ever recorded. So while we didn't see a tremendous amount of tweets, we did see tweets coming from a bunch of unique or different accounts, which may mean that temporarily we're seeing more and more people coming into the space and talking about Bitcoin, but that really hasn't lasted to this point.
Okay, so then, I mean, looking around in a sort of a greater sense of the long-term sentiment, because we saw that you saw there, what you addressed there were the spikes that came in the wake of this incredible spike, and whether it's a chicken or the egg situation, where it begins and where it ends, I guess has a bit of argumentation either side. But looking longer term, because surely that hasn't changed that much since last week, or has it?
Yeah, it really hasn't changed that significantly. We can go to this chart. Hold up, give me a second here. What you can see here is 30-day average tweet volume, which is the line, and the blue area chart is long-term sentiment score. So long-term sentiment score has basically been on the decline since the end of the summer. It actually is still positive, but it's on the decline. And we did see that spike in tweet volume, but it's nothing too significant. We're not at a super different place from where we are, but the one kind of big positive here is that historically we've seen that positive sentiment combined with low tweet volume actually tends to lead upwards price movement across not just Bitcoin but other digital assets. So if there's a positive from here, it's the fact that while sentiment is declining, it's still relatively positive, and when sentiment tends to be positive and tweet volume tends to be below, for example, the 6-month moving average, if the last month is below that, that tends to be a positive for the coin. So that there may be a bit to look forward to here.
All right, so I mean, I guess there's a bit of diverse signals coming out here at the moment around potential, maybe some counterintuitive signaling that's coming across. So without, being too deterministic, are there any conclusions that you think you can draw from the data that's coming out regarding sentiment right now in the wake of that spike, which, as we all saw, had a pullback, but still considerably above the baseline support we were sitting at prior to this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it's likely that the movement was really just one or a few individuals that were sitting on a bunch of tether or cash, or and basically decided that they wanted to allocate to Bitcoin, instead of kind of spreading that trade across multiple days and across multiple venues. Likely just executed really fast and tried to get a position, which kind of caused this spiral effect. It doesn't seem like it had to do with China really, though that may have added to it, or anything else. I mean, I don't think there's really a good explanation for what happened. And from speaking to all the largest firms and funds in crypto, nobody has any idea what actually happened. So I don't know if we can draw too many conclusions, though I will say that sentiment remains moderate and tweet volumes remain kind of low. But one interesting thing that we've been tracking for a while and that we've talked about before is the envy tweet ratio for Bitcoin. And that's thing that's actually interesting. And I think, if anything else, this is a really positive sign for the coin. So what the envy tweet ratio does is it basically takes the market cap of Bitcoin divided by tweet volume. So what it's looking at is it's a measure of what multiple of your social activity does a particular network trade at. So in the past, we're looking at, in this case, at Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, and Litecoin. We had seen, that the envy tweet ratios, while not the same, moved in very similar directions for a lot of these coins. But beginning this summer, and specifically in July, we began to see a big divergence between the envy tweet ratio of Bitcoin and these major alts, with Bitcoin now trading at a much higher premium of its social activity, which to me is potentially a sign of increased institutional interest in Bitcoin, because these institutions are not necessarily, sending thousands of tweets on Twitter, but they are the ones that could, be buying and bringing market cap up. And that's reflective in this next chart here, where we see this large divergence on Bitcoin between social activity and market cap growth. So if anything, I think, recent activity is, with market cap growth and tweet volume not really increasing, is a positive sign for Bitcoin, and potentially a sign that larger money players are now kind of moving into the market and allocating to the coin.
And as well, just sort of looking ahead, and this is getting a little speculative here, but I mean, we all remember back in April 2nd, we had that big price spike, at the time pumped by fairly reasonably clearly pumped by a big whale, moving the market considerably, and then that led to an exponential run-up. Now, obviously, we can't necessarily know now whether that's going to happen again, but I guess what I'm wondering is, do you think a single pump like this, given the scale of it, is enough to shift market sentiment in the longer term and to really turn what was looking like a pretty bearish market around into the longer term?
I think we have to see what happens in these next few weeks. I think we have to see what happens to price. It does seem like people tend to be generally more positive. The last few days, sentiment has actually been positive. If we look at daily sentiment score, which compares conversations over the last day versus the previous 7, conversations are continuing to become more positive, which is a good sign for the coin. I don't think we can draw any sweeping conclusions yet. I think that there's going to be a lot of volatility, which as a trader, I think is an absolutely great thing. But I think it's yet to be seen where the market's going to go from here. I think people are still trying to make sense of what happened. And I think it's going to be very hard to do that. And I think people are trying to make sense of this China thing. I mean, at first people were very excited, but I think now people have taken a step back and realized, wait, this is about blockchain, not necessarily crypto. The Chinese government is not necessarily looking to buy up the entire supply of Bitcoin. And maybe this latest movement wasn't all that justified. So I think we're kind of in a little bit of a wait and see mode to figure out, how the market shapes up in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, certainly. It does seem that there was a few people willing to jump the gun there, but as we've seen in the past, in this market, some of that naive trading can be enough to get people up and about, get the market to fully change some sentiment, get those animal spirits up and running and those bulls on the go. So we'll have to see what happens. I'm sure we'll have plenty to discuss in next week's stress test. But in the meantime, Joshua Frank, co-founder of The Tie, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this Halloween, where things are wild and woolly, turning us from all over. Be safe out there. And in the meantime, stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Ashley Westcott Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.